Trolling. I want to talk about trolling and how we define trolling because I think this is very important. It's something that's really come to the fore of social media. One of those lexicons that really is in widespread usage, but I suspect it's one of those things that's thrown around a bit. So this is my take, and this is only my opinion. You don't have to agree. I interpret a troll not obviously in the old Nordic sense of a large goblin-like creature who eats little children, of traditional fairy tales, but a troll in the internet sense is someone who I think kind of conducts cyberbullying in the sense that they want to wear someone down. They want to get under someone's skin. They're not interested in sort of adult debate or adult critique. And that second part is very important. I want to come to that. But they just want to wear someone down. So they'll get into very, very ad hominem attacks, but not because it's necessarily that they want to criticize someone, but they're actually trying to get under the person's skin. They're trying to wear them down. Um, I do not think that strongly worded criticism is the same as trolling. I do not think that disliking a public figure or criticizing a public figure or a political party can be called trolling. Um, Threats are obviously threats. That's a different matter. That should be taken seriously because we know that there are dangerous people out there who will act on threats. So I agree that should be taken seriously. But if let's say for example someone says this politician is piece of shit. I really don't like them. I really can't stand their policies. Um, okay, you could argue it's a bit crude, a bit crass, but it's an honest sentiment. I think when we talk about discourse, when we talk about dialogue and debate, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to expect everyone to be super polite. You know, it's just human nature. There's a lot of public figures and some of them you will warm to, some of them you won't. And if people are making decisions that affect other people's lives, they need to have skin. And to be fair, most politicians do. But this also applies to any public figure, really. They have to have tough skin. And whilst I'm very critical, for example, of paparazzi harassment, and I think there should be laws against that, I am also critical of celebrities or public figures who immediately kind of play the victim whenever they're criticized. If you have opted to be in a life that is in the public, so that could be in showbiz, it could be in politics, it could be in sport. If you're putting yourself out as a public figure, you have to accept that some people will not like you. So if you come out with things, I think part of the problem is the sort of people who complain about trolling. I think part of the issue is, in some cases, I'm not saying this is always the case, but in some cases, they're simply not used to someone challenging them. So what they interpret to be trolling is actually just strongly worded criticism. And I think this is very, very important to determine because I think we need to be very wary of a situation whereby we are seeing curtailment of free speech and people being penalized or even criminalized because they've made strongly worded criticism of someone. If they're making a threat, that's a different matter. And if it is persistent harassment, that's also a different matter. But say one or two posts, like say for example, you really dislike something a political party is doing, you go to their Facebook page and say why you dislike it. I don't think that can rationally be called trolling. Political parties make decisions about people's lives. So, in a democracy, it is right that the people have a scope to criticize, right? If they're threatening individual politicians, that's a different matter. And I'm not saying that that isn't also a problem. So, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there isn't a problem with harassment and there isn't a problem with people, conducting cyberbullying. I know it exists. I've had some pretty unpleasant fire thrown in my direction. Believe me, and there's times it does get to you. You know, no matter how tough skinned you think you are, there are times that can start to wear you down. So I would say that trolling simply is someone who isn't interested in just criticizing. They're going beyond that to actively try and get under the person's skin, or rather to just repeat the same point over and over again. So an example of trolling would be I've made videos here, I've had trolls. Now, I don't see trolls as people who disagree with me or they leave a comment like, Nathan, you're wrong about this. That's not trolling. What I see as trolling, and I've had a few people, personally, they don't bother me that much, but I can understand maybe someone with mental health issues would really be affected by it. So, for example, someone saying, I've had people say to me, Nathan, you're one of those creepy white guys that prey on Asian girls. And I'm thinking it might be a video, for example, about crime in the UK. I'm thinking, where the hell did that come from? So obviously, they've heard one of my videos where I've mentioned that I worked as an English teacher in China, and they just put these little things together to try and get under my skin. Just for the record, it doesn't work with me, but that is what I would define as trolling. You know, that isn't a criticism about, oh, I disagree with your views on crime, or I think you're wrong about this, or something like that. Um, or even like unfair criticism, like oh you're one of those ultra conservatives or you're a bleeding heart liberal or whatever it might be. I don't think trolling and insults are necessarily the same thing. I think you can make insults without trolling. Some people might be skeptical of that, but I think you could be quite sharp in critique and say, and that might be perceived as insulting, and it's not necessarily the same as trolling. So I think it is very important that we know what trolling is, especially when we're talking about legislation, because if we're not careful, we'll be in a situation where every time someone has said something sharp, blunt online, that's going to be considered trolling. And what would that mean? That would mean that we're never honest, that we sanitize everything. I don't believe that should be the way online or the real world. By the same token, I don't think the politicians in the real world need to be super polite. I think if they, for example, if someone really lays into a politician, I think the politician would have a right to say, well, back off, you're wrong. You know, give as good as they get. We expect politicians to be real people, and then we get annoyed if they are. Can't have it both ways. So all I'm saying is perhaps I'm making a pitch for people not to be so sensitive. That's not to say that serious bullying doesn't occur. I mean, if you have, for example, a young person or sometimes older people as well in regards to a workplace, who are really being hounded by a group collective, that's horrible. You know, in no way would I ever trivialize or downplay bullying. I hate bullies, and I do recognize there's a problem with that. But I think there is a difference between having a sharp disagreement with someone or even using blunt language versus trolling. And I think it's important that we know the difference.